Hello, everyone. I'm Ulysses. Today, I am here with Professor Amy Slep, a clinical psychologist, researcher, and professor at NYU whose research focuses on many different aspects of conflict and violence in relationships with families. She has published over 150 scientific articles and has made a tremendous impact on how we understand child development, family violence, and discipline. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and such an honor to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too. It's a pleasure.
So let's dive right in. I want to ask about one of your articles, Parent and Partner Violence in Families with Young Children, Rates, Patterns, and Connections. So your study found that nearly 90% of families reported some form of partner or parent aggression. And that's a shocking number. So what do you say about how we define normal in family conflict?
Um, well, I would say, I mean, it is a shocking number. It that's a prevalence. Those prevalence numbers are over the last year, so it's not necessarily that 90% of families are having physically aggressive conflicts, routinely. Um, but we do know that because of how invested we are in the outcomes of our conflicts that we have with our family, that is usually where we have, as humans, the most anger, the most intense anger, and where we experience the most conflict. So, it is not in that sense, it's probably a little less surprising that it is also the context where we're most likely to end up, getting physical in our conflicts. Although we would also like to think because they're the people we love, that it's where we are the most careful and sensitive, but, seems like that's not necessarily true.
Yeah. And you talk about the need to move from individual analysis to a more family level approach. So, how could that shift influence how we design prevention or intervention programs?
Sure. Well, most of our prevention and intervention ends up being organized around a person who's the target. So it could be that there's someone who is referred to intervention because they engage in aggression, like domestic violence, and they're referred to a domestic violence intervention. It could be that one parent or caregiver is referred to a parenting program because their family has been pulled into the child welfare system. And even our prevention programs, even our universal prevention programs, so healthy relationship education that sometimes happens in high school health classes and such, focuses on one relationship. And I think it doesn't, none of those things recognize the fact that we bring ourselves into all our relationships and that we know empirically that if one child is um, a victim of abuse, that their siblings are at much higher risk for being abused. It is not routine that we end up then checking, seeing how all the other siblings are doing. It is not routine that if one person is in treatment for domestic violence, we check and see what the needs are, not only from a victimization perspective, but also from the perspective that the other partner may have at times been also escalating and being physical, and maybe they also would benefit from some services to help them think about other ways to manage conflict. Um, and so I do think that if prevention programs and interventions were more sensitive to the entire family context, be um, it would be useful from a public health perspective, and it would also help people do what in intervention work we call generalize their skills so that they could learn. Sometimes it might be easier for someone to practice constructive conflict resolution with their child and then get better at it with their partner. But if they're told, like, just practice with your partner, they may not never think about trying to apply those same strategies with their kids.
I see. Something that really stood out to me in your papers is just how normalized certain types of violence are, and especially when it comes to parenting. A lot of families don't see mild aggression as violence at all, but rather just as discipline. And that brings me to something we hear all the time, especially debates about corporal punishment, is that we hear often that I was spanked and I turned out just fine. But your data suggests subtle psychological impacts even from mild aggression. So, many who were spanked say, it taught them like respect, but your findings show that abuse survivors are actually more likely to perpetuate this violence. So, how do we dismantle this generational myth? Like, what are your takes on that?
Yeah, well, that's a lot, right? Um, so it is, of course, true that there is variability in outcomes. There's no question that it is not the case that every child that is spanked or even abused is going to per perpetrate abuse as an adult. There's a lot of data to suggest that people can be resilient to incredibly terrible environments. We are not great at being able to predict from the beginning who or under what circumstances is going to be able to sort of be resilient versus not. But there are people who are. That said, we don't there isn't anything to suggest that corporal punishment is more effective than all other parenting practices. So, um, it can be useful in getting child compliance in, the immediate situation, but there are other techniques that are just as useful. So there isn't any data to suggest that there's a sort of realm of parenting where corporal punishment is uniquely capable of getting parents the outcome they want. So, since other kinds of strategies that are not aggressive are as effective and don't carry this risk of elevating the likelihood that people will perpetuate aggression as adults or that the child will be psychologically harmed, um, then using those other strategies is a better way to go. So, there is a ton of data on, parenting techniques that do work, and there are kind of I can't speak, sorry, widely available, what is known as behavioral parent training, that's positive parenting, that can help people effectively discipline their kids, because that's what I hear sometimes is like, it's important to me that my child listen, that my child be able to be respectful, that my child know limits, and I don't wanna be one of those parents who never sets a limit. Absolutely. But, there are effective parenting strategies that set limits and enforce limits, but that are not aggressive. So, I would hope that parents turn to that instead of corporal punishment.
So, going off from that, how can we help people understand that, even this like well-intentioned discipline like speaking can actually, have a long-term psychological effect on children?
Yeah, I think part of it is to kind of get the word out that there are these alternative strategies. So, one of the issues in psychology for a while was that these effective parent support programs were all things that you needed to pay for, and that, of course, is a huge barrier. There are, is it okay if I name a couple that are available, more widely available? People have done a lot to try to reduce the barriers. So, there's one of these parenting programs is called The Incredible Years. There's like parent workbooks. You can get it on Amazon that like teach you the strategies and help you practice that are effective. The Centers for Disease Control, to try to remove that barrier, built a huge website with exercises and videos and all sorts of things called Essentials for Parenting Toddlers, um, that that they made because of the public health benefit of trying to, help parents, support parents in getting their kids to achieve the goals they want and behave well, but without resorting to corporal punishment. So I would recommend people kind of look into those and think about how to learn strategies that will get what they want in the short run,
Yeah.
which is to have a 2-year-old who listens to you when you ask them to do something, and also get them what they want in the long run, which is to have their kids be well-adjusted and healthy adults.
Yeah. And moving on to another article that you published, Risk Factors for Child Physical Abuse, you found that there's high correlations between child abuse and psychological responses like elevated heart rate and skin conductance. Could this suggest that abusive parenting is sometimes more of a biological stress response than a rational one?
I think there is a decent amount of data at this point to suggest that parents who have really strong physiological reactions to kid misbehavior, uh, kiddos screaming, that kind of thing, which are, that stuff is aversive and unpleasant and stressful for everyone. But there are people who have more of a biological reaction to that. And if you do have that kind of physiological reaction, then it is harder for you to interrupt that with your rational thought. Um, that said, then the key is to practice the kind of parenting strategy you want to use
Mhm.
so that you're not overrun by
Yeah.
that physiological stress. So it becomes as automatic as, you know, smacking a kid.
Mhm. This research, made me think how we judge parents. Like we label them as bad or abusive. But so is it true that this your work suggests that what's really happening is the trauma and stress and the lack of support?
I think for some parents, that's definitely true. There are parents who are picking these more extreme forms of discipline because, they do believe that it is a better parenting
Yeah.
strategy. I think we have fewer parents who are in that place than we did 50 years ago. But there are still some parents who are in that place. And to them, I would say, you can get your kids to be just as compliant using other strategies, and you may as well. And for the parents who are operating from a place of trauma and stress and lack of resources, we should do more to try to support parents. It's an unbelievably hard for even for people who are otherwise well resourced. You have enough food, you're safe, you have housing, all of those kinds of things. Parenting young kids while navigating the rest of life is incredibly
Yeah.
challenging.
Mhm.
And the more we can support parents, the better. Better for the parents and for the kids.
Kids, yeah. You also make a very clear distinction between, minor parent-to-child physical aggression, like spanking, to child physical abuse. But you also highlight how they exist on the same continuum. So I want to ask, is like, could this lead to like a slippery slope to abuse?
Absolutely. In many different ways. So, um, it is the case that if you are engaging in what you think of as sort of measured corporal punishment, but you're just a little angrier than you typically are, it's hard to fine tune the exact amount of force you're using, and it puts you at risk for crossing the line, even if you would say that wasn't your intent. So a lot of the work I do is around that line, and there are times parent after parent whose explanation is, I was disciplining my child and the child moved, and therefore belt hilt their eye instead of their bottom or something. Well, okay, but it's abuse. When you have a big welt on a child's eye, that's abuse. And um and so it can happen by accident in that sort of air quotes accident way because something happened that changed the amount of force you were playing with.
Mhm.
Playing with is, an unfortunate pun, but
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's what parents are
Yeah.
doing.
Mhm.
And I would also say that as you become more used to um, that kind of Lower level corporal punishment, it if your child if it's not getting you the compliance that you're looking for or the responses from your child that you're looking for, and you haven't sorted out a bunch of other strategies you can use that help you also achieve that, then you may be increasing the severity of the corporal punishment or the frequency of the corporal punishment in ways to try to make it work. And in fact, what you're doing then is crossing the line to abuse. And so that can also be the slippery slope.
Hmm. So if you could leave, parents, educators, and policymakers with just one key takeaway from your research on child discipline and aggression, what would it be, and how do you hope it shapes the future of how we protect our children?
Um, I would say that it is that, although I do understand why we are still using corporal punishment, um, that there are plenty of parenting strategies that are as effective or more effective, and I wish that it were easier for parents to learn about those, even if that isn't what they experienced in their own homes. And so I hope that parents continue to seek those out
Mhm.
and get evidence-based parenting, training or parenting resources. There is a lot of noise out there. You have to cut through the noise to find the stuff that is in fact effective. Um, but I hope that parents have an easier and easier time over time finding the resources that'll help them with that. Um, an anecdote is that there's a parenting program called Triple P. It's the word triple spelled out and then the letter P, that was developed for parents in Australia. When we tried it, I didn't try it, but other scientists tested it in South Carolina. It reduced child abuse rates enough that they could see it across the state.
Wow.
And that is the power of these simple parenting strategies. Because of the way the United States has multiple levels of government and different kinds of um, entities that bear the cost of both child abuse and kid behavior problems, um, we don't have any kind of system of trying to improve parenting in our country, but that program has been implemented in 53 countries to try
Wow.
to reduce child abuse and improve kids' behavior problems. So both
Yeah.
things at the same time.
Yeah.
And, you know, I would like us to do it,
Yeah.
but it's going to be the people
Yes.
instead of the government that helps us get there.
That's really incredible. And, thank you so much for your time. It's an honor to speak with you. And, for the people watching, I'll see you next time.